All right, let's just jump right in. What if the very foundation of how we understand cancer was flawed? Today we're going to explore a really different way of looking at this disease. It's called the cell suppression theory, and it's based on the work of a researcher named Mark Lintern.
And yeah, that really brings us to the core question here, the one that drives this whole idea. What if our main theory of cancer is just wrong? I mean, that's a huge question, right? It challenges decades of research, decades of treatment.
Okay, so to even ask a question like that, you first have to accept something really important. A lot of people think the origin of cancer is, settled science. But it's not. Not even close. It's actually much more like a big, unsolved mystery. A puzzle where we're still missing some key pieces.
And what's kind of wild is just how many different theories there are out there. According to the material we're looking at, there are at least nine different scientific ideas about how cancer even starts, and yet almost all of our treatments today are based on just one of them.
So what is that one big theory?
Well, it's called the somatic mutation theory, or SMT for short. This is probably the one you've heard about. It's the idea that cancer is a disease of our genes, that it's caused by a bunch of random, unlucky mutations that just make our cells go completely rogue.
But here's the thing. Here's the problem. The SMT, it really struggles to explain all 10 of the official hallmarks of cancer. The things a cell has to be able to do to be cancerous. The source we're using puts it perfectly with this analogy. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle, but you declare you're finished when most of the pieces are still in the box.
All right, so let's take a look at those missing pieces. Let's dig into some of the evidence that goes against the SMT. The source calls these the cracks in the foundation of the whole model. Okay, get ready, because some of this is pretty surprising. The source we're pulling from points out a few things. First, you can find so-called cancer mutations in totally healthy tissue. And some cancers, they form without any detectable mutations. Weirder still, if you take the DNA right out of a cancer cell and stick it in a healthy cell, it doesn't cause cancer. And get this, cancerous cells can sometimes just turn back into normal cells if you put them in a healthy environment. But maybe the biggest bombshell is this. The source claims that up to 80% of the studies that support the SMT can't even be reproduced. That is a huge, huge number.
So, what does all that mean? Well, the big takeaway here, according to this new theory, is that we might have it completely backwards. What if the mutations aren't the cause of the cancer? What if they're just a symptom of something else entirely?
And look, this isn't just some academic debate, right? This has very real consequences. When you look at the survival rates for late-stage cancers, the numbers are they're really tough to see. And the argument here is that this reality check is exactly why we so urgently need a better theory, one that could actually lead to better treatments.
And that brings us to the solution being proposed. It's a totally new way of looking at things called the cell suppression theory. And this slide really gets to the heart of it. The old way of thinking? That's cell malfunction. The idea that our own cells just break and go rogue. But this new paradigm is called cell suppression. The argument is that our cells aren't broken. Not at all. They've been hijacked. Okay, I know this flowchart looks a little busy, but it shows the key difference really well. So over on the left, you've got the old model, cell malfunction. It starts with things like carcinogens, leads to random errors, and then cancer. But notice how it ends? With a lot of stuff that's hard to explain. Now look at the right, cell suppression. It starts somewhere completely different, with an infection. The idea is that a pathogen gets in, hijacks the cell, and that starts a very predictable chain of events. Things like hiding from the immune system, growing weirdly. That, according to this theory, explains all the hallmarks of cancer, no exceptions.
Okay, so a pathogen hijacks the cell. But how? How does that actually work? Let's connect the dots here based on what the cell suppression theory suggests.
So, a huge piece of this puzzle is something called the Warburg effect. It's a super weird thing that cancer cells do. Basically, they become total sugar addicts. They just devour glucose and ferment it for energy. Now, what's so strange about that is they do it even when there's plenty of oxygen available, which is the exact opposite of what a healthy cell would do.
So, why the weird sugar addiction? Well, the two theories have totally different answers. The standard theory, SMT, says it's because the cell's little power factories, the mitochondria, are broken. Simple as that. But the cell suppression theory, it says something completely different. It says the mitochondria are not broken at all. In fact, they're busy doing something else, fighting an infection. And because they're busy, they force the cell to switch to that less efficient sugar-burning method. So it's not a mistake.
It's a defense mechanism.
And this diagram really ties it all together. Just follow the arrows. It all starts up top with what the theory says is an intracellular fungal infection. So this thing gets inside the cell. From there, it's like a chain reaction. The pathogen stops the cell from dying like it should. It kicks off that Warburg sugar burning thing we just talked about. That then leads to the tumor creating its own blood supply. That's angiogenesis. And then finally to the cancer spreading, which is metastasis. See how it all connects back to that one single starting point?
And this whole idea of microbes being involved isn't totally out of left field. The source brings up this quote from Professor Thomas Seyfried. He's a major cancer researcher, and he says that these microbes are facilitators of fermentation metabolism. That's just a fancy scientific way of saying that these little bugs can drive that whole Warburg effect we've been talking about.
And this is the big picture. This diagram literally puts that fungal pathogen right in the middle of everything. And from that one central point, you can draw a straight line to all 10 of the hallmarks of cancer. Everything from spreading to other tissues to hiding from your immune system. The whole argument is that this is the unifying explanation, the thing that the old mutation theory just doesn't have.
So, okay, let's say this theory really does explain things better. The most important question is, so what? What does this actually mean for patients, for doctors, for treatment? Well, that brings us to a potential new path forward.
So, what does that roadmap look like in practice? Well, for one, it helps explain why some of these therapies that target a cell's metabolism might actually be working. It also gives us a really good reason to go back and look at stuff that's been overlooked, like simple antifungal drugs. But maybe the biggest thing is it creates a new framework, a new way for patients and doctors to think and make decisions. It changes cancer from being this random, terrible luck into a process that maybe, just maybe, we can understand and actually target in a new way.
And we'll leave you with this final thought from the source material. It's a really powerful call to action, and it's full of hope. It says, "It is time to move beyond confusion. It is time for a new resolution." Now look, whether this specific theory turns out to be right or wrong, it's a powerful reminder that we have to keep asking these big, tough questions if we're ever going to find better answers.